think Christianity is actually pro-technology, but then there's a way where it can be harnessed and used for kind of highness ends, to kind of, I go back to the smartphone thing. I go back to big tech a lot, in which we think we're using this technology, but increasingly it's become obvious that we're being manipulated by it. It's actually controlling us more than we're controlling it.
Welcome to For Humanity and AI Risk Podcast, episode number 37, Christianity versus AGI. I'm John Sherman, your host. Thank you so much for joining me this week. The first time we have really gotten into religion on this podcast, but certainly not at all the last. I would love to interview different people of different religions on the show who have interesting perspectives on AI and their faith. If you have ideas for who those people might be, please email them to me at forhumanitypodcast@gmail.com. Waking up the world to AI existential risk will happen a lot faster if communities that are already organized and active can be enlisted, and religions have most of the world's population coming to weekly meetings already. There might not be a better potential growth partner for the Pause AI movement, which is becoming the largest mass movement in human history right before our eyes right now. For Humanity is the AI Risk Podcast for the general public. No tech background required. This podcast is solely about the threat of human extinction from artificial intelligence. I have a few things to share this week before we get to our interview. I hope you got a whole lot out of the shows with the Harris brothers of Gladstone AI for the last 2 weeks. I am learning a ton from those guys, and I am so glad to know them. I am happy to share with you that last night I had dinner in D.C. with Jeremy Harris of Gladstone AI. He and his brother Edward are so super sharp and have such a different, more practical, more action-oriented vibe than almost everyone else in AI safety. Jeremy is incredibly impressive and cool, and it was so awesome to be in person, not just pixels. People have asked me in the comments for the last 2 weeks and in email what the Harris brothers' P-Doom is, their percentage chance that AI kills us all. Jeremy told me last night if 3 years ago he could have seen us at dinner, he would have been surprised. He thought AI would have already killed us. And he told me that if 3 years from now we are having dinner again, he would again be surprised. He doesn't think we will make it that far. But, he is optimistic about the future. He thinks he could well be wrong and that we could have a real chance. So he works daily with a smile and urgency and purpose because there is no alternative. Tuning it out or giving in are not options. And waiting for other people to fix it aren't options either. Jeremy and his brother are physicists and entrepreneurs who became State Department investigators and congressional lobbyists, essentially, because no one else was doing anything. And real change can only come from government now, with the Frontier AI Labs locked into their race condition. So what can you do? You are just a regular person sitting at home watching or listening to a podcast. Well, here are 4 completely free things you can do in 2 minutes that will help you spread the word about AI risk. Number 1, share a For Humanity podcast on your personal social media feeds and tell your community why it's important to you. Sharing episode number 1, please look up, is always a great introduction. Number 2, email episode number 1 of For Humanity to a friend or family member. I know you don't want to ruin their day, but honestly, we need to get past that feeling. Not telling your family member that their house is going to be bombed soon is not doing them any favors. Number 3, this is the easiest one. Just hit the like button on this page right now. It helps the algorithm to get more people to see the show. And number 4, leave a comment. Again, it helps the algorithm know that we are out here and bring people to us. You can also donate to the show. We are reaching more people now than ever before. We're close now to 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. That is a really big deal, and your donations have helped boost the views of each show by more than 3 times. The 4 Gladstone AI videos are already at more than 75,000 views combined in just 2 weeks. So every dollar you donate goes to buying YouTube ads to bring our message to new people. Honestly, the account is running low. I do not want to lose momentum, so please donate this week if you can. All right. Let's talk for a second about the way I title and construct these shows. Today, it's Christianity versus AGI. A few weeks ago, it was Dad versus AGI. A few weeks before that, it was Trucker versus AGI. And there are many more versus shows in the works. I title the shows that way because that is truly how I see it and how I believe it is. It is all of us versus the creation of AGI. If we create an unaligned AGI, as we are on course to do, I have very real concerns that none of us are going to be having dinner in 3 years. So it's us versus AGI. Also in the same vein, I told you about this last week, let's talk more about it. I am launching a nonprofit with the help of For Humanity viewer and guest Louis Berman. It is called Dads Against AGI, and its purpose will be to fund AI risk awareness communications projects, the first of which is this podcast. We are working on a logo, website, legal paperwork right now. It should be up and running this month. Much more on that to come. If you want to get involved with that, please email me, forhumanitypodcast@gmail.com. I am also looking for a volunteer podcast producer. So email me if you are interested in that, looking for someone who can give a few hours a week to this. Okay, I have 2 clips that I want to play before we get to today's interview. The Harris brothers at Gladstone AI hear from new whistleblowers at the Frontier Labs all the time. OpenAI whistleblower William Saunders was on the Big Technology podcast talking about how his work at OpenAI was like working on the Titanic.
So, William, you left a few months ago. What was the vibe and what was the sense you got of OpenAI as you were heading out there? Like, take us a little bit inside the company so we can understand the environment from which you're coming out of.
So, during my 3 years at OpenAI, I would sometimes ask myself a question. Was the path that OpenAI was on more like the Apollo program or more like the Titanic? And the Apollo program was about carefully predicting and assessing risks in doing groundbreaking science, building in enough safeguards to be able to successfully bring astronauts to the moon. And then even when big problems happened, like Apollo 13, they had enough sort of redundancy and were able to adapt to the situation in order to bring everyone back safely. Whereas the Titanic, came out of this competitive race between companies to keep building bigger and bigger ships, and sort of ships that were bigger than the regulations had been designed for. Lots of work went into making the ship safe, and building watertight compartments so that they could say that it was unsinkable. But at the same time, there weren't enough lifeboats for everyone. And so when disaster struck, a lot of people died. And OpenAI claimed that their mission was to build safe and beneficial AGI. And I thought that this would mean that they would prioritize, putting safety first. But over time, it started to really feel like the decisions being made by leadership were more like the White Star Line building the Titanic, prioritizing getting out newer, shinier products, than really feeling like NASA during the days of the Apollo program. And I really didn't want to end up working on the Titanic of AI. And so that's why I resigned.
Okay, one more related clip for you. So while Sam Altman's employees are scared to death their work project is going to kill themselves, their families, and all life on Earth, their fearless leader, Sam Altman, is out driving supercars. Take a look at this. Here was Fate of the world, yes, that means your family will die too, CEO Sam Altman, looking shifty-eyed as fuck, out for a pleasure cruise in one of his supercars, something called a Koenigsegg Regera. That's the name of the car. While his employees' hands are shaking while they build his fucking Death Star. Okay, friends, time for this week's interview. So I said that I want to get all up into religion and AI. This week, my interview is with Peter Biles, a Christian writer and blogger who has been writing about AI for the online publication Mind Matters. A link to some of that writing in the show notes. Obviously, Peter is just one person and does not speak for all Christians or all of Christianity, but each of our 8 billion voices deserves a say in what is going to happen. And Peter has put some really interesting thought into AI, AGI, and Christian faith. Here is my interview with writer Peter Byles. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So let's just start out. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So obviously you are a young man here. Tell me where you're from, a little bit about yourself, and maybe how you sort of started thinking about this whole AI thing a little bit.
Sure. So I'm from Oklahoma. I was born and raised in a small town called Ada. And I my dad was a biology professor, taught at a local university for the past 30 years. So that's what brought him to Oklahoma from Texas. And I grew up loving creative writing and reading. And so I was really into that from a young age. And I lived in Ada my whole life until I was 18. Then I went to college at Wheaton, which is a small Christian liberal arts school in the Chicago suburbs. So that was my first time leaving Oklahoma and doing something new. So yeah, and I was an English major at Wheaton, which was, I think, a good choice for me. And and so I had been thinking about technology and kind of in a critical manner for quite some time since I was maybe in high school. Mainly had to do with like smartphone addiction and how I was noticing that pop up a lot more. I'm like an older member of Gen Z, and so I feel like I escaped some of it, but so I was always interested in that aspect. But I guess fast forward a few years, I went to grad school through Seattle Pacific University for a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And then right after that, I met some people from a think tank called Discovery Institute, and they have a wing called the Walter Bradley Center for Artificial and Natural Intelligence. And they published a little blog called Mind Matters. And so I told them, they knew I was interested in writing. I'd published through some outlets. And so Mind Matters deals more strictly with artificial intelligence and issues in tech. So I think that's kind of where I became more interested, particularly in artificial intelligence and its impact. And that was 2022. So that was the year that, ChatGPT hit the scene.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were talking about it. So it was a pretty good time to hop in on the conversation.
Sure. Awesome. And so another important component of this conversation today is you are a person of faith. And so just tell me a little bit about your faith and where that comes from and how it affects how you think about these issues around artificial intelligence. Definitely.
That's a good question. So I was raised as a Baptist, I guess you could say. My dad was raised Methodist. So generally Protestant family from a young age. Both my parents are very devout Christians. So I was basically born into it. I wouldn't say I became a Christian for myself until I was about 14, maybe 15.
Okay.
So I became more serious about it when I was a teenager, and read people like C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, and people like J.R.R. Tolkien. Some of those guys who were faithful Christians, but also very serious about their craft and writing. So they became kind of models for me as I became, more of a writer myself, and as I entered college, especially at Wheaton. Wheaton has one of the largest, I don't know what you'd call it, exhibits or storages of C.S. Lewis's personal library and belongings called the Marion E. Wade Center. So people come from all over to study C.S. Lewis at Wheaton. Then that was part of the draw that made me interested in attending there. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely affected how I think about technology. I think there's a long tradition of people of faith, I think, being critical or just at least very suspicious about, technological and scientific progress. But not necessarily like progress in the sense that it's enhancing our lives for the better. I think you could argue that Christianity played a role in things like the scientific revolution, and in believing that the world is it was created, it's intelligible through reason. We can seek to understand it. So I think Christianity is actually pro technology, but then there's a way where it can be harnessed and used for kind of highness ends, to kind of, I go back to the smartphone thing. I go back to big tech a lot, in which we think we're using this technology, but increasingly it's become obvious that we're being manipulated by it. It's actually controlling us more than we're controlling it. And so that's kind of been my perspective on digital technology, especially. And as I've tried to learn more about artificial intelligence with AI as well, and it seems like it's an extension of what's been developing for quite some time. But as far as going back to the question of how really my faith informs that, I think, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this in a minute, but I guess it's just this conviction that as human beings we're more than just matter, we're more than just material, and so we can't be compared necessarily to just machines. But at the same time, we are physical beings. We are, we're finite. We're not infinite, and so we have limits, and that's actually a good thing. So, but at the same time, we're. I think the way I'd put it, we have souls. We're embodied souls, so we're spiritual beings, actually, not just physical beings. And to put it in explicitly Christian terms, we bear the image of God, and so every human being is worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of what religion or ethnicity or anything like that. We're all equal in the sight of God. So I think that's the conviction that I try to keep front and center when I'm talking about technology and AI. And it's like, what is actually worth the dignity of human beings? And are we kind of undercutting ourselves by embracing some of this technology? Is it kind of cutting away at that divine image, or is it sort of, that's kind of, I hope that makes sense. It's sort of like,
no, totally. I think that's really good. So I want to, before we go forwards into AI, I want to go backwards into social media just a little bit, because I feel like that is the sort of original misaligned technology with humanity, right? Like we've had it for whatever, 15 plus years. It is clearly has a lot of corrosive, toxic effects on many parts of humanity, and yet we all rely on it. We all enjoy it. Religious organizations use it to organize their congregations. They use it to draw people to them. So, just like we all do, right? It's like we're using it, we're enjoying it, and yet we see the corrosive effects of it. And we cannot turn away from the candy. We cannot give up the good stuff in order to address the bad stuff. That's my perspective on social media itself. Does that align with yours?
Yeah, I think so. I've always struggled with this because I've always had a weakness for social media. I got Facebook.
Me too.
Where I got a Facebook. I was kind of a lucky Gen Z kid because I like I said earlier, I'm on the older side of the spectrum. I was born in 97. I think the cutoff date is like beginning in 95, sort of the first generation to grow up with the internet. So I remember Snapchat and Instagram hit the scene probably when I was in junior high. Now it's like they have phones when they're 9. So I feel like I was kind of spared some of that early exposure, but I did have a Facebook when I was 12, I think. It is kind of a double-edged sword. I used to kind of think that it was social media as a tool that can be sort of harnessed for either good or ill. I'm not sure I'm as convinced of that these days. I think it's kind of, and this goes back to kind of, the algorithmic nature of social media, that we think we're curating a feed that we choose, but it's sort of is taking what we prefer. So I guess in a sense, it's like a mirror of what we like and what we're interested in, but it's also kind of telling us what we want at the same time. And so I kind of feel like it's naive for, the example I usually use is, I've heard of like a lot of churches and particularly youth ministries, which you find more in like evangelical Protestant contexts. So I grew up in a youth group. But nowadays it's like they're trying to use TikTok to appeal to junior high kids and high school kids.
Right.
And I don't think that's wise, actually, even though the content that's being presented might be like Christian or gospel oriented. It's still embedded in kind of this broader network of things that it's just an addictive app in general.
Yeah.
I think what churches could do and what ministries could do is, I don't know, I don't want to say reject social media wholesale, but I think reject TikTok for sure, because it's the most powerfully addicting app out there that I'm aware
Sure.
of. I think Instagram's getting up there too, but I hope I'm
sure.
It's sort of like,
no, totally. I feel like there's a parallel between the social media and the AI, right? Where it's like, there's good stuff that comes from both, and there's bad stuff that comes from both. Social media is not going to kill us. It's not an existential risk, but we have not been able to address our love for the good stuff and also be able to substantively address the bad stuff. Like, we have abjectly failed at making social media work for humans. I think you could probably make I've always thought that, like, does it bring people closer together or does it push people more apart? And I think the intention was to bring people together. I'll show you pictures of my family on Facebook. You'll sort of be engaged with your people in your lives. But then it's like you say, it's the algorithmic component to it, where if you like something, you're going to get only that. And like that's what you're going to get. And in the pre-social media world, if you really like something, you would still be exposed to things you don't like that might expose you to them and change your mind about the thing you do like. But now it's like, it's just, if you get on the ride, you're not getting off.
Yeah, that's really true. I want to say when I first got Instagram, maybe in like 2013 or 14, I don't know if this is true, but from what I remember, you scrolled and then it stopped, and all the feed ended at some point, and there weren't many videos, and there weren't things that showed up that you didn't follow. And I got rid of my Instagram because it was just inundated with crap, basically, the stuff I wasn't choosing to watch. And they were trying to emulate TikTok to a degree that, and it used to, I think Instagram was always going to impact mental health in teens, particularly teen girls, has become evident. In retrospect, you can see that. It just seems like it's gotten worse.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's throw it now into today's terms, into AI world. And, something I hear referenced a lot that makes me think about religion and AI is the idea of a sand god that, made of silicon, which is made of sand. We are creating an intelligence that will be vastly superior to ours in every way. As a religious person, what do you think when you hear the term sand god and you think of this thing we're making?
I mean, it's interesting to me that a lot of these people, kind of these technological futurists, put it in such religious terms. I think it's so fascinating on one level. It's it's sort of, they're not trying to hide the sort of like cosmic implications of the project, which is concerning. But it's also, I think it's also reflects kind of, we still live, I would say our culture now is post-Christian. Maybe you could argue about 50, 100 years ago, it was still generally, at least culturally, Christian. I think we moved beyond that, but we can't quite yet dismiss the cargo of like 2,000 years of Western history. So we still think in sort of these terms of, God and salvation, and I got to find a path to redemption and even immortality. If, I guess you talk about some of these transhumanists who want to use AI to somehow upload consciousness and not sure exactly how they imagine doing that, but I think it's concerning because obviously I believe there is a true God who is benevolent and created all, all things. And so I'm always reminded, there's a story in Genesis about the Tower of Babel, if you're familiar with that. It's in Genesis chapter 11, but it's sort of it's a story in which early on in the scripture, people of earth all speak one language, and they build this tower they try to build a tower that reaches to heaven, basically to showcase their superiority, their hubris. And God sees this and confuses their languages, so they have to scatter all over the earth again. So that's it's an interesting, I feel like it's an interesting metaphor you can apply.
Right. I mean, that's technology, right? That tower is essentially technology.
Yeah, it's sort of man's attempt to replace God with his own, his own intelligence or his own achievement. When earlier in Genesis, God commands Adam and Eve, the first couple, to go forth and multiply over all the earth, and not to just coagulate in one point and try and do this one thing where everyone's the same. And so that's kind of how I see. Yeah, I don't know. It's probably an imperfect metaphor with artificial intelligence, but that's kind of how I've been trying to view it lately. Is just, we're trying to create something that way we don't fully understand, that we think will raise us to a new level as a civilization, but might actually end up fragmenting us and crippling us even more. I think that's the metaphor that is a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt. He's the one I read a lot for the issues on social media and mental health. But that's kind of the metaphor he uses. His Substack is called After Babel. So it's like, how has technology actually fragmented us? So there's a lot of things you can use that metaphor. But I hope I'm not sure that makes sense.
No, that's helpful. And so, this is something like, I'm not a religious person, and I've always wondered, like, do you believe that everything that humans do comes from God? So like the AI itself, if humans have made it, it is essentially from God. Is it, or is it not?
That's a great question. It's a really good question. Well, so to go back to Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, he had this essay, I believe it's called On Fairy Stories. So kind of giving an apology or an explanation for his philosophy of writing The Lord of the Rings and similar works. But the way he put it, it's like because he was a devout Catholic. I think the way he put it was, God is the creator, the ultimate creator. And so if we're made in God's image, then that means we have that sort of creative impulse to create. But the way he described it was that humans are sub-creators. So we can't create things ex nihilo or out of nothing, like Christians believe God did at the beginning. But we are called to make things, and to make things well, and to cultivate and to make culture. And so I think that extends. For me, I'm a writer, so I try. For me, it's like I interpret that as, I'm a creative writer. I try to write books and novels and poetry and that sort of thing. But I think it also extends to other spheres of human life too. But I also think that there's a creative impulse in human beings that's good, that's God-given. But I think there's also another force at work, you might say, that I think is opposed to God's creation, that's destructive, and that tries, like the people in the Tower of Babel, not to cultivate creation, not to create a culture that's human honoring and bent towards human flourishing, but that's more bent towards power and like domination and warring against other people for the sake of kind of a usurped authority. And I think that's the figure of Satan in the scriptures kind of aligns with that notion. And whether that's in the story of scripture, Satan was God's most glorious creation, but he envied God, and so he tried to usurp God's throne, and then he fell along with like a third of the angels or whatever. So it's an interesting idea, that notion of like, we're not satisfied just to partner with God and like create and sort of furthering the goals of his creation and cultivating it, we feel like we need to implement these systems of control through technology. And because of, what I believe, because of pride, because of sin, because of our, because of the way we've strayed from our original intention as sub-creators, we've misused the gifts that God intended to be used for good. I hope that makes sense. I feel like
no, totally. No, it does. And so, do you view AI itself as a misuse of what God has left for humans?
I'm tempted to say so. There's a lot of Christians who clearly differ on AI. There's a lot of people that I've seen in Christian spaces are creating like these bots, that are supposed to answer your spiritual questions.
Right.
They've started doing this with like therapy, with having AI therapists. And to say the least, I'm uncomfortable with that. I think there's something really amiss, and I'm sure hopefully we'll discuss this a little more in depth, but I think we have an issue of thinking that just because we've developed a new technology that's, undoubtedly compelling and impressive, even, that we have to try and implement it into every sphere of our lives. And you saw this with social media, just sort of an unapologetic embrace of the technology. And I think you're seeing it to a degree with AI too. And I think it's sort of experiencing this hype where, because it's here, we have to embrace it. I think a lot of churches have fallen into this too. And I think
it's like it'll write your emails for you. It'll do, there's all these like process efficiencies. It'll make running a church a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. Efficiency. And I think that's a word that's interesting because, at one level, they're totally right. It is, in a lot of ways, it is efficient. But it's also kind of impersonal, and it's not real. It's not a person talking to you. And I think as a writer, when I started thinking about AI, I thought about it in connection with literature and with storytelling. And the question I had was like, can it tell a story? In what way can AI actually spin a narrative or write cohesive prose?
Yeah.
And kind of the conclusion, I'm still wrestling with that question, because clearly it can write. It can.
Yeah, it's getting better every day.
Getting better. It's getting better every day. But then I thought there's something missing there, because when I'm reading a novel, I'm actually doing more than just computing words on a page. I'm sort of entering into the consciousness of another human being. I'm sharing their world. I'm sharing their perspective on something that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so I started seeing literature and writing, not all writing, but certainly more narrative types of writing, is like, this is a conversation between two human beings, and that actually matters. That it's a human endeavor, and that it's not just like spat out from a computer code. Even though it might resemble human language, it lacks human intention, it lacks human soul, and so it's not, in that sense, it's not like, it's not really real. It's not actually saying anything to me.
Right. And so, these are literally called large language models, but you're basically saying that when we talk, we're exchanging more than language.
Yes, I think so. I think there's something relational going on. There's something personal, and that goes back to, I believe we're more than just a collection of atoms that are sort of interacting. But under that worldview, I guess broadly called materialism, we're that idea that we're just sort of almost like high functioning computers makes more sense when you don't have this sort of deeper understanding of human nature.
And so like like I said, I'm not religious. I was my father is Jewish, my mother is Catholic. Neither one of them was very religious, so I was just not raised. We have a Christmas tree and whatever, but like it's not religious.
Uh-huh.
But I've always wondered for people that are, you're saying that there's like this layer of something on top of what is essentially the core human, and I agree. There's this layer of something that we don't know what it is. Like, I fully believe there's more to life than I can see. there's more to life than I as a human can understand.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't believe that anything that's written in any one book is the word of what that thing is. And that's just, I just can't get past that in my, that like this book is right, but all the other books are wrong, is something
Right.
I've never been able to get past. But I think that is so important as we talk about consciousness and how we as humans perceive it and understand it, because so much of the world are people of faith, and so much of the world across the spectrum of faith sees this other thing on top of being a human. And I guess the question is, they make us believe, the experts make us believe that these machines that we're creating, when it's 1,000 times smarter than us, it'll not only be able to like scientifically pick apart what that layer on top is, but maybe, understand it to a degree that we wouldn't even be able to understand, maybe be able to replicate it. So what are your thoughts on something 1,000 times smarter than us picking at that top layer that you call one thing and I call another thing, and all people all over the world call different things, but it's the same sort of thing, to really be able to get at it?
Gosh, yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, I don't know. I think this may be an area where, not just Christians, but people who are open, even just open to the notion that of transcendence, whatever that means. It's an opportunity to maybe band together and figure out, okay, maybe we differ on which religion is particularly true. But where can we find some common ground here to, because even though it's hard to quantify or understand consciousness, but we all kind of experience it. And I think that's one of the beauties of, for me in my field, I write fiction a lot. And so it's an opportunity to kind of get behind what you're saying, that top layer through language, through trying to embody someone else's experience.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the idea that, I guess your question also reminds me of this notion that's been around for a while, that if we can just reach a sort of material explanation for whether it be the origin of the universe or consciousness, religious experience, even, or even like, things that we wouldn't, I guess, even enjoyment of culture and art, like how can we explain those things away through material processes? And I don't know, I guess the best answer I have is like, maybe let's not submit to that. Let's not be like anti-science or anti, let's not turn a blind eye to the findings of neuroscience. I don't think that's the call for religious people, or certainly not for in the Christian notion. Like, the physical world is good, and we should be on the frontier of discovery. So
Yeah.
But then there's also a sense in which there's something kind of undercutting about this idea that we just have to find the almost like the most reductive solution out there, and then we'll kind of understand. And I think we're on the same page about that. Sounds like let's just remain open to the idea that that there's something more beyond just the material world, and and there's different articulations of what that might look like regarding whether you're just a sort of agnostic on the God question. But yeah, that's I'm not really sure what I would. I'm skeptical that we'd ever get to that point where we're duly satisfied with like an answer, that we can find an explanation for. I'm kind of losing my train of thought here, but we would get to a place where just okay, we kind of figured that out. We figured out the issue with the mystery of language, and because I think so much of human life is experiential, and we don't necessarily have, even if we posit certain conclusions about how the world works, we still, I don't know. I don't know anybody who wants to kind of abandon this idea of like love being a real thing and taking pleasure in reading for non-utilitarian gains. Like it's hard to. I just think there's some things that remain really hard to explain away, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure I'm fully answering your question.
No, you are. So let's talk about the good case future that like there's obviously sort of like accelerationists out there that are pushing go as hard as possible, as fast as possible. And they point to this good case future that I think is going to start happening around all of us very soon, right? And it talks about job loss, like, 80-90% of the people aren't working. We are all doing leisure activities of our choice. Our bills are paid and our lives are wonderful. And everyone on earth is leading similar to an upper middle class American lifestyle today because energy is free and, goods and services are free. And it's this world of abundance and we've been living in scarcity. There are so many fundamental questions in that good case world about like what makes a human, and does a human who doesn't work find fulfillment in that life? Much, if not most of the world is religious. So all of this stuff is going to go right there too. So I guess it's in a world where nobody works and everybody just leisures around. I guess if you were into religion, you could just spend all your time like being super religious.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the good case future that they are selling us, which includes things like people won't even die. Like that is a serious thing. They literally say is like, we're going to life extend and end death itself. So a life where you don't have to work, you don't have to die. How does that interact with Christianity?
Oh man, yeah, so many ways we can go with that. But I think, sort of this utopian vision of the robots are taking care of. And I guess there's examples in the last 100 years where, we lost all our cabbie drivers, right? Or our carriage drivers because cars were invented. So there's a lot of people who are out of a job, but it kind of changed the economy such where it sort of opened up new avenues for them to work. But then in this scenario, it's like presumably there's no new job market yet that gets opened up. We're all just available to spend our time at leisure. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of that sounds enticing, I guess, but I think I'm trying to remember who I heard this from. Maybe it was like, it was some podcast I was listening to, but he was saying that if we had sort of this utopian vision that a lot of kind of futurist type people want us to have, we would have like this mansion, everything's brought to us, we have all the food, we have everything, pleasure is just right there. Eventually people will just start breaking things to have something happen, to have some excitement or drama, to break in on the scene. I thought that was pretty insightful on the human condition, because I'm not sure that just having our material needs met and overflowing will be enough to kind of satiate the inner restlessness that we all kind of feel. And so I think that's probably what the Christian answer would be, is that and it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning in Genesis. The call for humans is to go forth and cultivate and to work. There's like a goodness of work, and I think there's something about like if we forego that drive to work and to be creative and to do good, then it's kind of inevitable that we atrophy, not just like physically but even spiritually. And you have to ask. I think something that's missing in the conversation, what people think that this utopian vision would kind of solve everything, if we just had pleasure or comfort, is that it seems like kind of a meaningless existence. And so I think we have to have some sort of meaning in our lives to propel us forward. And so I think that's probably what I would say, is like, it would be convenient to be nice for a while, but I think we'd get bored real fast, and we'd either start introducing some chaos to the scene or we'd do something to occupy ourselves, because I just think it goes against, kind of our impulse.
No, that's such an interesting, you use the term inner restlessness. I think that's such a good term for like this thing in humanity that we all have that we just can't sort of put our finger on. And I just had a thought that was like, oh crap, like imagine an AI model that's 1,000 times smarter than us that is also has an inner restlessness, but it's just something totally different than human. It's you know, ideas, pursuits, goals, thoughts are alien, but similarly restless. That's pretty terrifying.
There's this book called the Singularity. It's an Italian novel written in 1960, I think, but it's about like a sentient AI system that has this sort of restlessness, but it's because it's based off of the personality of like a deceased woman. It's very creepy. There's a new translation that just came out, if you're interested. But yeah, that's what you said reminded me of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, let's talk about this. Obviously, you know, things are moving so quickly in AI, right? I am very concerned with the ability of like the governments of the world to keep up, the population of the world to keep up, and certainly the religions of the world to keep up, because this thing is moving so quickly. And it's going to give, like we're talking about, candy to, you know, every minister is going to be able to get out his messages quicker with AI tools, just like social media helps the process of anything you're trying to do, makes it better. Is there any chance, you think, that there is like some sort of realization among the religious leaders of the world that like this thing that is giving us all this good stuff is actually maybe not good itself? And is it possible that there's a world where religious leaders become people who are helping to wake up the public to the dangers of AI existential risk?
I hope so. I hope we reach that point. It seems like there's some cultures, maybe particularly like Japanese culture, that seems more open towards incorporating the robotic into the religious. And so, but that's sort of an aside. I think, I do think that, you know, as AI advances and as it increases and as it's used more for, I kind of wonder as it's used more for sort of a stand-in for human relationships, including religion, and therapy, and even like sexual relationships and dating. That's something I think is going to be really, really, really powerful, and it's coming. It's already here, and I think it's probably up to churches and local communities who, who care more about just the efficiency and the computational aspect of it all. It's like there's something beyond efficiency and quickness that we need to recover here. There's this notion of love and relationship within community, this idea of like sacrifice, that I think Christianity teaches us pretty central. And I think this emphasis on just the human, just the uniqueness of the human being, and the things that humans do or who they are that can't be replicated or computed by computers, I think is going to be really essential for churches. And I hope we maintain that idea, or we recover that notion that human beings are unique. Where there's human exceptionalism that sets us apart from the animal kingdom in a way, but also the robotic kingdom, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that will necessarily stop the actual advance of artificial intelligence or AGI. But I think it might reach a point where we're just so inundated with fakeness on the internet, and just just like a thirst for the real. Can I just have something can I just like hug someone, or touch a real tree?
Yeah.
Can I say a prayer that's to a real God, or do I have to go through this, through this robot priest or this chatbot who's just asking me to, or telling me to ask good questions about the divine, and it'll give me answers. And I think that's going to be, I'm sure that'll extend sort of into new agey types of stuff too, where, you can use chatbots to kind of discern, I don't know, the wavelengths of the universe or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's going to be I think there's just going to be a backlash in general where we thirst for the basics again, and it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard to distinguish what's real and what's fake on the internet with the advent of AI. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping that churches can kind of
It,
lead the charge in that way to say like, hey, this is what really matters in life.
that would be amazing. Like in my head, there's a world where, like, the Pope has been pretty outspoken about AI, which is awesome. Like really outspoken to important people. I'm like, that's amazing. What if we had some incredible Muslim leaders come forward? What if we had some incredible Jewish leaders come forward? Hindu, all the leaders of the world, all the faiths of the world, like, unite around this thing, which is basically creating this robot God that is directly competitive with every single religion on earth, in almost every way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, what are the mechanics of that? Like, are there real, like, interfaith organizations, international interfaith organizations, where you have the leaders of all the religions, like, meeting regularly, talking about stuff they could align on? Is that fiction of my brain? Is that a real thing? I'm sure there's so many organizations in the world. There's got to be something.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any that are, like,
big
directly
scale effective at that.
Yeah, or just in opposition to AI in particularly. But I know there's, I can't name any names off the top of my head, but I know there's interfaith organizations that are, seeking to be in dialogue with, I think, particularly monotheistic. I'm more aware. I think there's a lot of in common between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's a bit easier to talk about, particularly in the West, because there's a lot of cultural and social issues that I think those three religious traditions, they share concerns about a lot of things, and so it's might be easier. But I think what you're talking about is needs to go beyond that and realize that there's like a new religion in town, and if we don't start talking about it, then it's gonna, like, all of our religious traditions are gonna be kind of sacrificed to alter this thing. And more people, I used to have a professor who said the biggest religion in the world is not Christianity, it's Facebook, or it's cell phones or something like that, because there's now more cell phones on earth than there are people. And he was just making the point that if we're not careful about this stuff, then it can easily take over.
Yeah. There's a guy podcaster, author, really cool guy named Mo Gaudet, who has this book, Scary Smart, and he talks a lot about abundance versus scarcity. And basically that, like, for the first 100,000 years of humans, we were in abundance, and we were, sort of pastoral hunter-gatherers. Everybody was collaborative. And then one day someone drew a line in the sand and said, the plants on this side belong to me and the plants on this side belong to you. And it was the start of agriculture. And that was the beginning of scarcity in human history. And so since that point, we have had all these mechanisms of scarcity, money, all these things of scarcity have come into our lives. They're saying that the future is going to be based on abundance. I guess my question is religion itself something that is a product of scarcity, where people are, have all these concerns that they wouldn't have in the culture of abundance? And how would religion itself, whatever religion, adapt to a culture, a world where everything is available, everything is abundant? And, I think suffering is greatly reduced in that world. How does that world relate to religion?
Oh man, yeah, it's another great question. It's interesting to see, where kind of pockets of the church in history has sort of flourished, and a lot of the times it's under places where there's a lot of persecution. So you think about, I guess, the underground, the catacombs in the Roman Empire. You think about, I guess, in the sort of the Soviet era, there were underground churches there, where if they showed their faces, there was consequences. So yeah, that's really interesting to think about. If, I guess, beyond persecution, if there's just all this material abundance that we enjoy, do we really have needs beyond that? Yeah, I don't know. I guess I think you even find this in the sayings of Jesus in the New Testament, where I think there's a parable where Jesus talks about he kind of says, "Woe to the rich man who has stored his barns full of grain and thinks that that's enough to sort of absolve him and to make him okay in the world." But then God comes to him and says something like, "Tonight your soul is required of you." So he took care of his material needs, but there was a whole other dimension of the rich man that he neglected. And I kind of wonder if that's might be a temptation for our super abundant futures, that
Yeah.
it's easier for us in the United States, I think, for in wealthier nations to assume that that we're kind of autonomous, independent beings who have it all. And I feel like sometimes it just takes sort of like, I don't know, I guess it takes instances of tragedy or brushing up with the reality of mortality. Um, Little things that kind of remind us of our fragility, that there are still these looming questions. First of all, like, how did we, why is there something rather than nothing? I guess that's the basic question. But, questions of, is there life after death? That sort of thing. Questions that simply, and I'm all for, having more abundance and more food and more, alleviating poverty through, entrepreneurship and capitalism. If that's like a system that works for people. But then at the same time, are we racing ahead materially, but we don't have the moral or the spiritual maturity to kind of match that progress? And I guess the question of meaning, like life's meaning, is still kind of would gnaw at me if I had, and I kind of do have it. I mean, I don't go hungry. I'm not super rich, but I'm comfortable, and yet I'm still kind of restless. I mean, sometimes I kind of dread the weekend because I have to sort of figure out what I'm going to fill this time with besides work. And I end up sort of piddling around on my smartphone and being really dissatisfied with that as an as an option, because it's like I have everything. It's all good, but at the same time, there's something kind of missing here.
Yeah. Yeah. That
So
is
I
like,
think, yeah.
We're still very much figuring out what everything means, right? We all want to have everything, but we don't really know
What do you do when you get that point?
Yeah. You want something else. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I've been my experience. So let's talk about this. There is like in this sort of existential question world, there is a religious component to it. I think that's sort of unavoidable. And like, we're literally, like, I truly believe that the work that Sam Altman and the Frontier AI Labs are doing runs a very real risk of ending all life on Earth in the next 10 years. I think that is possible. That's an end time story. That's a religious story.
Yeah.
End times revelations has been such a component of our modern politic in America. I feel like, not that I want to talk about politics, but I feel like, the idea that we could be in the end times now, both objectively appears fairly reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
and also has a ton of obviously religious underpinnings, and there's a lot of in religion around the idea of the end. So how do you think about the singularity and end times, and all these sort of trains come into the same place?
Yeah, I agree that there's sort of this apocalyptic language being put forth. I think someone who's really articulate on this issue he's an Irish writer named Paul Kingsnorth. He was started out as kind of in the environmental movement back in like the 80s, I think. But like 3 years ago, he converted to Eastern Orthodox Christianity. But he has this term where he calls just the machine, and we live in the age of the machine, as he describes it, and that includes sort of the acceleration of technology up to this point, but also beyond that includes artificial intelligence now, and what all that entails. And he talks about how a lot of the people who create AI don't exactly know fully how it functions, which is concerning.
Totally.
And with his newfound faith, he's kind of incorporated like a spiritual understanding of technology, where it could even be co-opted by spiritual forces. I don't know what I think about that, but that's one way that, or at the very least, it could be employed by bad actors to really hurt human beings, kind of like you're saying. So I think about that as a metaphor a lot. Like, we're just entering this age of where the whole world is kind of becoming more under this grip of surveillance, of manipulation through algorithm, of addiction to, obviously drugs of all kind, but screens in particular, and the sort of a manipulation of the mind that makes it so much easier to implant information or messages that kind of cause us to even subliminally question things or vote one way or another. There's another concern about big tech is they can subconsciously impact the way I'm going to vote in November. Even not that I want to vote for either candidate, but that's kind of scary. It's scary to think that my desires and thoughts and emotions are not actually my own, that they're being manipulated by this system, this algorithmic system that's so powerful now that I don't even know what's happening to me. But in reference to the end times, it does feel like on the trajectory that we're on, it's going to become it seems like it's going to come to a place where we lose some kind of core capacities for engagement with each other through critical thinking. If we offset more of our abilities to something like ChatGPT, again, we fail to understand the distinction between fake and real. It's going to be harder to trust our fundamental institutions. It's going to be harder to trust each other. And then I don't know what the actual machine is going to look like in the next 10, 20 years, but I can't imagine it's going to be benevolent towards like human flourishing.
Right. I have fears that there could be a confluence of support for frontier AI development, where you have like the AI accelerationists, and then whatever percentage there is of religions, Christianity, whatever, who are seeking and welcoming end times. Because I feel like there is a reasonably sized percentage of the religious world, of the Christian world, who is like, yeah, that's the goalpost. Let's go get it.
Right. It's like, that's
the end of the book. Let's get to it. Like,
yeah, there's a strain of, you find it mainly, I think, in Protestantism, maybe, where it's, our goal here is basically to get saved and to go to heaven after we die. So it doesn't really matter too much what we do on earth.
Right.
I kind of spent the last few years trying to unravel that, I think, false understanding of the Bible and of our world. Because it goes back to, if we believe that there's a creator as Christians, we believe that the world is good and it's worth trying to protect. And so I think there's a cause for the religious person to try to protect the environment and to steward and to care for the world that we live in. So yeah, but there is kind of this rapture theology that is still prominent. It's sort of like, we don't, like, none of this matters anyway. Let's just kind of let it burn almost, and let's just. And I don't think that's the right way to go. But it's sort of a strain of the religious in these days.
This AI stuff is like teed up for that line of thought.
Definitely, it's like, this is it. This is the sign of the beast or whatever it is.
Right.
So let's bunker down.
Yeah. Just, yeah, that's a terrifying future. All right, let's talk about something a little more positive. What makes you hopeful? What as you think about all this stuff, this AI future, what do you hang your hopes on?
Maybe it's just the circles that I'm in, but I feel like there's a lot of people that I follow on social media. Double-edged sword. Gosh. Well, I'm using Substack more these days, the new writing platform, which is nice. But people on Substack, acquaintances, people I've met that I think share my convictions that we need to kind of reclaim a human-oriented culture, especially in the humanities. And I think, there's a lot of problems with higher education now, but there's also, I think, maybe coming to a reckoning point where people are realizing its limitations, and we need to kind of change course. So I know there's a new university called the University of Austin that's blossoming in Austin, Texas. That's kind of reclaiming sort of an atmosphere of free inquiry, reading the classics, kind of getting a traditional education of reading the great books. So that encourages me. I think there's a lot of people who are advocating for a more human experience of the world that's not so co-opted by technology. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm encouraged by people like you who are speaking out about this and who are having a conversation about it. Just being willing to have a conversation with, someone like me who we know we differ on certain views, but we share concerns. I think that's so important now, just to reclaim that atmosphere of civil conversation. And I think I see that happening. You see maybe more of the opposite online, but I think it's he's a music and culture critic named Ted Gioia, who I follow on Substack. He's a very interesting person. Talks a lot about AI and the intersection with music and the arts, and he thinks that we're going to possibly reach a point where I might be butchering his words, but yeah, I think he's optimistic that kind of what I was talking about before, that there'll be a sort of a realization that we don't want this sort of fake world of the machine. We want something more authentic. We want something more relational. We want something more meaningful that's not mediated so much by screens. And I think he retweeted something. I think it was the George Strait concert, the country singer who performed at College Station, Texas, and it was a record-breaking attendance. 110,000 people showed up. And his caption was like, people still want to experience real music, not just like digitally curated stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged by that. I think maybe it's also because of post-COVID, where people were just sort of, realizing how much they needed community and a sense of contact with other people. So yeah, lots to be concerned about, but I think there's glimmers.
I like that. And maybe there's a world where when we get smarter, because we have this artificial intelligence making us smarter, and it teaches us more about what being a human is, that we have more appreciation for it, that we were able to sort of understand the specialness in a more concrete way and respect it more.
Yeah. Or just come to a better understand of, what AI can, understand its limitations in a healthier way, and not worship it as something that it's not treated as something godlike.
Yeah. Super interesting. I really appreciate this, Peter, and I really appreciate your time. I've been thinking about these issues as they relate to religion, because religion is such a huge part of many people's lives. It's not a huge part of my life. And so I just want to run around and bang pots and pans and wake the whole neighborhood up to, like, what, our house is on fire as a species. And religion is so important to so many people. It seems to me such a quick way to activate a whole lot of people, efficiently and with speed. So I am just hopeful that religious leaders around the world will, come to terms with what this is and really draw a hard line against it. That's one of my highest hopes.
Definitely.
So what do you think? Are you religious? How does your faith inform your thoughts on AI and AGI? How does your faith inform your footing towards activism? Leave a comment or email me. I would love to hear from you about this. Okay, my friends, it is 2024 and we don't know how long we have to live, so we live every day like it's our last, and we end every show with something we call a celebration of life, just something that makes us thrilled to be alive. This week, I'm going to play for you one of my absolute favorite songs of all time. It reminds me of summer and the beach and simpler times. It's a song called Magnolia, written by the late, great J.J. Cale. I have two versions of the song for you today because I found two that I want to show you when I was looking on YouTube. First is J.J. Cale himself from 2004 in a very analog recording version.
We're going to add a little bit of saxophone. Over on saxophone, Miss Destiny. Somebody want to hear this song here. We're singing soft summer breeze makes me think of my baby. I left in New Orleans. I left in New Orleans. Magnolia, sweet thing. Lord, you're driving me mad. Gotta get back to you, baby. You're the best I ever had. You're the best I ever had. Whisper good morning. So gently in my ear, I'm coming home to you, baby. I'll soon be there. I'll soon be there. Magnolia, sweet thing. driving me mad. Gotta get back to you, baby. You're the best I ever had. You're the best I ever had.
Thank you.
Okay, that is pretty fucking cool. But then I found a cover while I was looking on YouTube of Magnolia by a singer named Matt Anderson I had never heard of before, and just wow. Check this out.
All right, this is Magnolia by J.J. Cale. Whippoorwill singing, a soft summer breeze reminds me of my baby I left down in New Orleans. I left down New Orleans. Magnolia, you sweet thing, you're driving me mad. I've gotta get back to you, baby, 'cause you're the best I'd ever had. Best I'd ever had. You whisper good morning so sweetly in my ear. I'm coming home to you, baby. I'll soon be there. I'll soon be there. Magnolia, you sweet thing, you're driving me mad. I've got to get back to you, baby, 'cause you're the best I'd ever had. 'Cause you're the best I'd ever had. You're the best I've ever had.
How about that? Wow. Okay, my friends, that is all for this week. Please remember, smile. Take a vacation if you're thinking about it. Have some kids if you're thinking about it. Live life. We cannot be effective fighters against this stuff if we are not healthy ourselves. So take the time to take care of yourself this week. Do not allow all of this stuff to bring you down. We need to keep ourselves up so we can keep the fight up too. All right, please remember, AI risk is not someone else's problem. It is yours and it is mine. Quoting the late, great Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. For humanity, I'm John Sherman. I will see you right back here next week.